Why? It's a simple question with no simple answers. Why now? Why this? Why me? Is God even here? Is he listening? How can we know? We've made it through dark times before, and I want to have faith, but I still wonder, why?
Good morning. Do you know what? I want to get straight into it, and I want to ask you a question. I wonder how many of you have got a bad habit that you just wish you could stop. Maybe it's something that niggles away a little bit and rears its head occasionally, or maybe it's a full-blown addiction that is taking control of your life. But how many of you at some point have said, I just wish I could stop? Maybe you've even prayed. You've prayed out to God and said, God, will you please just help me stop doing this thing? Maybe you've tried to negotiate with God and said, God, if you just help me stop X, Y, Z, I will then be able to do whatever you want me to do. Maybe you've prayed that. Maybe you've made a promise. Maybe you've tried really hard and maybe you've stopped for a little while. But then it didn't take long before you fall back into that very thing you've been trying not to do. You want to change, you try to change, you ask God to help you change, but it just didn't work. And that's the question we're going to be asking this morning. When we look in our series, Ever Wonder Why? The question we're asking this morning is, ever wonder why I can't stop? Why can't I stop? If you've ever asked that question, and let's be honest, do you know bad habits are something that we probably all deal with? Maybe you've caught yourself saying, I'm just going to scroll for 5 more minutes, and before you know it, an hour has passed. Maybe it is something that you see is more serious, like struggling to stop using a substance, and it's having a daily impact on your life. Everything around you feels a mess and feels like it's falling apart. The thing is, bad habits and addictions don't all look the same for each of us. You know, for some, it might be obvious, like smoking or drinking to excess. It could be eating too much or spending too much. For others, it could be something that's a little more hidden. It could be something like always needing to be right. It could be working so hard that some would say you're a workaholic. It could be comparing yourself to others until you feel absolutely terrible. See, a bad habit is something that you know isn't great for you. But in your mind, you can easily just brush that off. Maybe like always being late. Maybe like binge eating TV or eating a whole packet of biscuits in one go. Honestly, there is no judgment here. Addiction is often seen as something maybe a little bit more heavier. You know, when something starts to take control of our life, when it controls what you think, when it controls how you live, when it controls how you might spend your money. When we think about addiction, people often default to thinking about alcohol, to drugs, to gambling, maybe to things like social media or gaming. They're often the things we think about when we hear the word addiction. But here's the thing. Whether we're dealing with what we might seem as a bad habit or a full-blown addiction, all of these things affect our mind, our bodies, our relationships, and I think even our sense of purpose. And so for the sake of today, I want to use those two terms interchangeably, bad habits and addiction. So if I mention addiction, please don't zone out and think, that's not me, I haven't got a problem. Similarly, if you're in the grips of something that has got complete control of your life, and I might compare it to biting nails or scrolling on your phone, please don't take offence at that. Because both bad habits and addictions are unhealthy behaviours. They're unhealthy things that I believe prevent us being the best version of ourselves. They prevent us being who I believe God has created each one of us to be. And so maybe this morning, if you've ever asked that question, why can't I stop? Maybe there's an answer today that you haven't considered before. So what's going wrong whenever you try to stop something? You know, maybe you've got this behaviour that you want to change and you can't seem to do it. And I would say that in most cases, if you choose to stop a behaviour, you've got the right intentions. You really do want to stop that. But I would say you might have the right intentions, but maybe there's a wrong strategy. What you're trying to do is that you're trying to change, but you're trying to change in maybe the wrong way. And as we dive into this morning, I just want to acknowledge that, unfortunately, my message this morning is going to be a little bit incomplete. And I want to apologise for that. Because there's no way in the time that we've got this morning that I will be able to do justice to a whole talk about addiction or about theory of change. But when you ask, why haven't I changed? I believe there are multiple factors that are working against you. Things that keep you stuck in the lifestyle that you're so desperate to escape from. And I want to share just very quickly some of those factors that may be affecting why you can't change. And then hopefully we can get to the root of what the real problem is. So why is it we can't change? Well, for almost all of us, there would be practical reasons. Practical reasons why we find it difficult to change. For example, you might ask, why do I always eat the wrong food? Well, the answer might be because you have access to the wrong food and you haven't got access to the right food. You might ask, why do I always oversleep in the mornings? Well, it could be because you were up till 2 a.m. in the morning watching Netflix and you didn't set an alarm in the morning, therefore causing you to oversleep. There's a very practical reason. There are other reasons, not just practical. There might be emotional reasons. A lot of us, we have emotional wounds. You know, people say, don't you, we carry baggage. You may have past hurt and trauma and unresolved issues that have led you to coping in unhealthy ways. So there might be practical reasons, there might be emotional reasons. There could be, as well, what I want to call relational reasons. It's really, really hard to get healthy when you're surrounded by unhealthy people. It's hard to have the right mindset if all the people around us have the wrong mindset. You know, if you're struggling with using drugs and your 3 best friends are all drug dealers, there's not really a question why you can't stop, is there? You know, it's almost impossible for us to live the right life if you're consistently surrounded by wrong people. So why don't we change? Well, it could be practical, it could be emotional, there could be a relational element to it. And there's often a physical element, meaning some of us are just stronger in some areas than others. Some of us have vulnerabilities that others don't. You know, we might have bad neural pathways due to trauma we faced as a child. We might have a chemical imbalance. All things that may lead to a very physical reason why we might choose poor behaviours for ourselves. So there could be these 4 things: practical, emotional, relational, physical reasons, all factors that may lead us to adopting bad habits or addictions. But whilst I don't want to ignore those 4 things because they're all really important things and I believe all need addressing, but at the heart of the issue, almost every time, I would argue, is a spiritual challenge. At the heart of the reason why most people can't change, the root issue is often a spiritual issue. And what happens, whether you would say you're a follower of Jesus or not, what happens is that most people are looking for something. You hear people say, don't they, I just had a void, there was an emptiness inside of me. And what people end up trying to do is filling that void, filling that emptiness, filling that dissatisfaction with life with other things that aren't God. And it can lead to a distractive lifestyle. And so, as I said, whilst I want to acknowledge those other elements, and I would encourage you to seek help in those, it's the spiritual element of change that we want to consider today. So why can't we change? I want to be real for a second. Do you know what? Change is really hard. You know, whether it's trying to break a habit or deal with something that's more of an addiction, it can feel impossible, especially if you've got all those things stacked against you. And I think the reason it is so hard is often because we're focused on the wrong thing. Often, we get stuck on the rules and the guilt and trying to fix ourselves around any bad habits we might have. You know, if we try and give something up, we'll put boundaries in place to stop us doing it. Let me just give you smoking, for example. So maybe one day, if you're a smoker, you decide, I'm going to give up smoking. And you don't just say, right, I'm just going to give up smoking and that's it. You say, I'm going to give up smoking and these are the things I'm going to do to try and help me. You might avoid being around people who smoke. You might decide, I'm not going to keep cigarettes, lighters, or ashtrays in my house or in my car or in my workplace. You're not going to allow yourself just to have one. You might use other substitute items like nicotine patches and gum. You might replace smoking with healthier habits. You might engage in activities to keep your hands and your mind busy. You might check in with a support group or a smoking buddy. I mean, that is a big list of rules and boundaries. And none of those things are bad things, but we might get so fixated on the rules and the guilt when we mess up, instead of tapping into something that's much more powerful. Now, some of you, especially if you might be new to church, might think, hold on a minute, rules, guilt, isn't that what church is about? Isn't that what religion is all about? And that might have been your opinion. You might see church as just a place where, you have to keep all these rules to try and be perfect. Do you know what? If you've ever said to yourself, do you know what? I don't like religion. I don't do religion. I'd probably say me neither. And that's coming from someone who works for a church. Do you know what the crazy part is, though? Jesus said it too. Jesus often spoke to the religious leaders and said, do you know what? You've got this wrong. You're so fixated on the rules and the things you're meant to be doing. And Jesus was quite harsh with his words sometimes. Maybe you've had that mindset before. Maybe you thought, do you know what? If I follow the rules, maybe I'll be good enough. Maybe I'll earn God's approval. And the truth is, it doesn't work either. See, the thing is, we can't fix ourselves just by trying harder or following a bunch of rules. You know that because you've probably tried it in the past and failed. But here's the good news. Because there is something that does work. And it's a small word called grace. See, grace is totally different. Grace isn't about earning anything. It's a gift. Grace is God saying, you don't have to do this alone, I've got you. Now, the easiest way to explain what grace is, it's the receiving of a gift that you just don't deserve. So maybe if you mess up on something and you're ready for the punishment that's coming, and instead of that punishment, you get complete forgiveness and love. That is grace. Grace is God's way of saying, I love you just as you are. Hear that? I love you just as you are, despite the bad habits, despite the addiction, despite all the mess ups you've done in your life. God says, I love you just as you are. Do you know what? There's this verse in the Bible, and it's probably one that you might not be that familiar with, because it's in a small book called Titus, which is in the second part of the Bible. And this verse says this. It says, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. The grace of God appeared that offers salvation to all people. Now, I know that salvation word is quite a big word, and it's a very churchy word. But for the purpose of this morning, salvation is just God's way of making us right with him. Salvation is a deliverance from harm or a saving from harm that makes us right with God again. It's not about working harder. It's not about being good enough. This is about God doing for us what we can't do for ourselves. When we mess up, grace says you're forgiven. When we feel unworthy, grace says you're still loved. No matter how far you think you've gone, no matter how far you think you've messed up, grace is God reaching out and saying, you're not too far gone. Let me help. Let that sink in for a minute. Grace is right here on offer for everyone. Grace isn't there just for people who've got their lives together. Grace isn't there just for people who have attended church all of their lives. Grace isn't for the people who follow all the rules. Grace is for everyone. And what's amazing about this grace that's on offer is it's not about how good you are or how hard you try. It's all about how much God loves us. He meets us where we are, in our mess, and helps us to take real steps towards change. So maybe this morning you've tried something in sheer willpower and felt like you've failed. Maybe it's time to stop focusing on those rules and start leaning into this word called grace. Because grace isn't just a nice churchy idea. Grace is powerful. Grace is what can help you change in ways you never thought possible. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. I want to introduce you to Wayne. Wayne and his wife Sam and their son Luke are sitting over on this side. They've been part of the church here for just over a year now. And I want you to listen to Wayne's story, where Wayne has come from to where he is now. So have a look at the screens.
My life before I started drinking was just full of chaos and just destruction, really. And yeah, it just wasn't pleasant. I wasn't happy with where I was at. I started drinking when I was about 14, 15. I found out what alcohol was, and it just led to chaos from there, and didn't want to be at school, and drink and drugs was my go-to, other than where I should be at. Family-wise, I always felt unwanted and unloved. I felt like I had to always challenge for attention within the family home, and that in turn led to bad relationships with my mum, my dad, siblings. Felt like I was hated by them. And yeah, with relationships out of the family life, like school, I was badly picked on for being me. I couldn't hold down a job, jobs I was in and out of work. Obviously I didn't get any qualifications in school. Destruction and horribleness. The realisation come from me when my wife sat there and she said to me that I can't go on like I am, because I was drinking an astronomical amount, and I could see the pain in my wife and son's eyes, because it was Luke as well that was seeing it. I could see the pain of them just seeing me just drink myself into an oblivion on a daily basis. And another realisation for me was when it got really bad, and I was actually just struggling to perform everyday tasks. Everyday life was just getting a struggle. I was self-destructing up until I come to church. I attended the Forge, and that was back January last year around this time, I believe. I think it's just coming up to 12 months I've been coming to the Forge, and yeah, I was pretty much full speed into my self-destruction up until last year. Fortunately, I had some help. It was an outreach company called Anglian Care Trust. Yeah, they put me in contact with Turning Point, and they advised me to maybe I should do a home detox, and that was absolutely horrific, to be honest with you. With coming to faith, it made me realise a lot about the journey that I was on, and then I found out about a course that was being run through the Forge called the Star Recovery, and that really grabbed my attention. So I was just like, okay, it's in recovery. I'm doing quite well in my journey, and it interests me. Doing Star Recovery has helped me massively, because it's given me tools and access to resources that I wouldn't have had not doing Star Recovery. So some of the things that I've learnt from it has been absolutely amazing in my journey in recovery. It will be 12 months on the 23rd of January that I would have been sober for. So yeah, coming up to a big milestone. Trying to do recovery alone is a lonesome journey, is what I've learnt from previous times, because I have tried to do recovery before, and very rarely will you succeed doing it alone. So there's always help out there, and just talking about it has helped me massively. Having people that understand it and things has really helped with my recovery journey.
Wayne, we are so proud of you, and it has been an absolute privilege to be able to walk a small part of that journey with you. And this coming Thursday, as Wayne celebrates 12 months of sobriety, we'll stand with you and celebrate, because that is a huge achievement, and we are proud of you, Wayne. So thank you for sharing your story with us. Yeah. Do you know, Wayne has experienced that grace of God we were talking about. And not just in now being a follower of Jesus, Wayne lives in that grace day in, day out, because he's learned that God's power and God's grace has the power to transform his life daily. And you know what? That's the thing about this grace we're talking about. It's not just a one-time thing. You know, there might be loads of you here who may have said you've been Christians for many years and been followers of Jesus. And you said, you know, I know about this thing called grace. I know that God loved me when I don't deserve it. But you might still live in this kind of feeling that it's now on me. That God has done what he needs to do in saying he loves me, but now I have to do everything. I now have to get it right. I need to check those boxes. I now need to succeed. I have to try hard and make sure I don't mess up. You know, I'm going to try and be good. I'm going to try and not be angry. I'm going to try and not get drunk. I'm going to try and not swear. I'm going to try and not binge eat. I'm trying not to hold grudges. I'm trying to love other people. I'm just trying not to mess up. And we need to understand that that same love of God, that same grace of God that saved us, is the same God and the same grace that now sustains us. And I want to show you that power of God in that same verse we read earlier and what it goes on to say. Because when you ask that question, why can't I change? Watch what this verse goes on to say. So it started off, the grace of God has appeared and offers salvation to all people. And the next verse says, it teaches us. Watch what it says. It says, it teaches us to say no to ungodliness. It teaches us to say no to worldly passions. It teaches us to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. Sometimes we might struggle to say no to the things that we know aren't good for us. We might find it hard to say no to the things that don't align with the kind of life that we want to live. We might feel stuck in our bad habits and our addictions, chasing desires and things that just leave us feeling more and more empty. So what helps us break free from that and live a life that feels meaningful? Live a life that feels balanced and true. Live a life that you believe is the life that God might be calling you to. But here's what it's not. It's not about following a set strict of rules, striving to be perfect. It's not about living in fear of messing up. It's not about trying to earn anyone's approval or being afraid of failure. The real key is much bigger. This grace that we're talking about, this grace God has on offer, gives us the ability to say no to the things that hold us back. It's not about how hard we try or how strong we are. It's about leaning into something else outside of ourselves. Grace lifts us up when we're weak, gives us what we need to make better decisions, and helps us live that life that maybe you could only dream of. So if you've ever asked that question, why can't I change? Or felt frustrated by something you can't seem to shake off or get out of, let's just, in the time we've got left, take a deeper look. How does grace actually do that? How does it help us grow and heal and change and say no? How is it going to help us be the best version of ourselves? The things we try and do to change are usually concerned with things on the outside. You know, that list of rules I read earlier when talking about giving up smoking, they were all external things that you had to do to try and give up. They were all things that you had to do practically that people might see from the outside looking at you. So outwardly, you might say, do you know what, I'm going to try really hard to stop yelling at the kids. I'm going to try really hard to stop smoking. I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm not going to be addicted to endless scrolling on my phone. You know, I'm not going to just keep shopping. I don't want to shop till I drop. Actually, you do. You just don't want to pay for it. What it is, though, all those things are outward things. It's the external. And the focus of so-called religion, as people would call it, the rules and the life that you're meant to follow, is also outward. Jesus talked about this in a book in the Bible called Matthew, which just details the life of Jesus. He said this. Jesus said, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees." He said, "You're a bunch of hypocrites. All you're trying to do is to get the outside looking good," is what he's saying to them. And he says this: "You can clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence." He said, "Blind Pharisee, if you want to bring about real change, here's what you do. First, clean the inside of the cup and dish, then the outside also will be clean." If you and I simply just change our behaviour, our outward behaviours, but we don't change in here, if we don't change the root problem in our heart, what will happen is those behaviours, they just come back. And that's why so many people don't change. Because lasting change is a reflection of what God is doing on the inside. And that is often, I believe, the first realization that there is something internal. There's something at our core that needs addressing, something that needs transformation. And when you can recognize that, when you can admit that to yourself, and when you can bring that from the dark into the light, that is where I think change might happen. And maybe that's what you need to do this morning. Take some time to reflect internally and admit that maybe you do have a problem and that you need help. Because whatever we keep in the dark doesn't get healed. Do you know what? Sin and all the bad stuff, that grows best in the dark. When you recognize that something needs changing, you can be honest and ask for help. And I want to just pause for a moment in this moment, because I believe that we've come to a point where some of you, this might be the moment of truth. Maybe you're sat there and there's a realization that's come over you that's thinking, do you know what? I don't want to keep trying and failing. I want to be honest. I want to be transparent. I want to be different. And it's incredibly risky. It's risky to be vulnerable about any part of our life, especially parts we're not proud of. And the only way you can really do that is when we surrender ourselves and acknowledge that only by God's grace and God's help and God's love can we truly change. Now, if any of you have been familiar with any 12-step program, that's often the first step, is admitting to ourselves that we have a problem and knowing that you can't do it alone. And how do you know if you have a problem? Well, let me tell you, if more than one person has said to you, you've got a problem, you've probably got a problem. If there's a secret that you've been carrying that you're ashamed to talk to other people, chances are you have a problem. If there's something that you do continuously that occupies your mind, that you're even maybe thinking about right now and thinking about when can I next do whatever it is, you've got a problem. If it's something that affects your finances and the way that you spend your money, maybe even got you in debt, you've got a problem. And in this moment, because of God's grace and its availability to us all, there is hope. There is hope if you can admit that you have a problem and you don't have to do it all in your own strength. You know, asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It's a sign of wisdom. And here, as Martin said earlier, we want to be a community of people here at this church where it's okay to admit our faults, where it's okay to share that we've got bad habits and addictions. We want to be a community that supports people in that. You know, Wayne mentioned the Star Recovery course, and we run a 6-week course that helps, as Wayne said, just give you toolkits to help in recovery, and whatever that might look like. That could be a bad habit of biting your nails, or it could be a cocaine addiction. And the Star Recovery course, I know, has been helpful to others who have done it. And we've got one coming up starting at the beginning of March. And if that would be helpful to you, I would love to chat to you about it. You can sign up with the QR code that will be at the end afterwards. Come down to our information point and we'll be able to share more about that. But don't walk away from here thinking, do you know what, I need help and I don't know where to go. We want to be that place where you can come if you need help. See, when we admit that we need God's help and his grace, when we seek the support that we need, that's when change can start to happen. When we lean into what God says about us, what God wants for us, when we stop looking at all the stuff around us and the bad habit and the addiction you're currently dealing with, we will have a different viewpoint. Do you know, I don't have all the answers this morning for you on why can't you stop, but I do know that it runs deeper than we think. I think the root issue isn't an issue of willpower. It's not an issue of intention. Actually, you're chasing a quick fix for a pain or an emptiness, and trying to handle that on your own hasn't worked. And at the core, it's often that you haven't managed to fully trust God with that, and feeling like maybe you've had to control everything yourself. Maybe this morning you feel lonely. Maybe you feel overwhelmed. Maybe you just feel empty inside. And as you've tried to fill that space, that feeling has just grown. You haven't solved it at all. You might have heard that voice that said, you know what, you've just got to do better and try harder. But God is saying you don't need to try harder. God says, I'm inviting you in. Here's my grace. I'm inviting you here to trust me more. Do you know, there's another verse in the Bible and it says this, where sin increased, his love, meaning God's love, increased even more. Wherever there's shame, loneliness or struggle, his love is bigger than it all. Think about it. Maybe it's like, do you know what, as I was preparing this, I had this image of the old computer game Pac-Man. Stick with me. If any of you played that Pac-Man and you were kind of like this little creature that went along like gobbling stuff up, and you had these ghosts who were chasing you. And on the game Pac-Man, there was like these escape routes. And in this story, do you know what, you're that little Pac-Man gobbling up whatever your bad habit or addiction is, trying to avoid those ghosts that are chasing you. And God's grace is that escape route. There is an escape from this cycle of bad habit and addiction. There is a way out. See, we don't change by forcing ourselves to be better. We don't change by just trying harder. We change because of God's love and what it can do internally in us. Now, I'm not naive this morning to think, do you know what, you'll hear this and you can walk out here and you can be completely free of all your bad habits and your addiction. I'm not that naive. It will take maybe looking at those other factors we talked about, looking at the practical and the emotional and the relational and the physical factors that are maybe playing a part in your bad habit or addiction. But honestly, I think if you tackle this spiritual need, if you tackle this factor that's affecting how you're living your life, if you accept the grace on offer to you, I think that will give you a pretty good start to tackling any bad habit and addiction that you might want to be done with. So if you're feeling stuck today, I want to finish by saying this, and I want you to hear this. His grace is enough for you. His love is enough for you. And God is always faithful to show you the way out. Let me pray. God, in this moment, we need you. We need you maybe in whatever struggle we're facing with. God, teach us to rely on you. Teach us to accept your grace and love that's on offer this morning for us, so that we can live the life that you have got for us, a life that is free, a life that is full of joy. God, I pray that you will fill us with your love so that we can live freely. Amen.
Do you want to stand if you're able, church? We're going to sing one more time.